My name is Earl Reynolds. I am 48 years old, and until that October, I would have told you flat out that every monster story has a regular answer if you stay patient long enough to find it. I had spent 22 years logging across northern Michigan, and I trusted saw marks, track patterns, wind direction, and plain bad judgment a lot more than campfire talk. If somebody called in a scream from the tree line, I expected a fox. If they swore they saw a giant shape behind a barn, I expected a black bear on hind legs. I was not a man looking for mystery. I was a man looking for what made sense. I grew up outside Kalkaska, left for a while in my 20s, then came back because it turned out I liked cold mornings, bad roads, and people who said what they meant. Logging paid my bills and built my back until it also started taking it apart. The shoulder went first, then the elbow on the same side from years of saw vibration and hauling wedges in weather that froze your gloves stiff. I could still work, just not at full cutting pace. So the state recreation tract hired me as a ranger with timber oversight. I handled dawn patrol at trailheads, checked permits, tagged illegal fire rings, and spent afternoons with county crews marking dangerous snags and bad leaners before somebody got hurt. The county trusted my eye because I could read wood tension and root spread quick, and because I did not play politics with safety. If a tree needed to come down, it came down. If a campsite needed to close for deadfall risk, I closed it and took the argument. Our place sat on 5 acres at the edge of mixed cedar and poplar with one gravel lane, a wire fence line, and enough clearing for a truck turn and a wood pile under a lean-to. Not deep wilderness, not suburb either. The sort of middle ground where your porch light reaches 20 feet and then just gives up. Dana and I had lived there 11 years. She taught part-time at the elementary school in town and kept a garden so orderly it made my shed look like a confession of bad habits. We were not dramatic people. We had a routine because routine works. I came home, kicked off my boots by the mudroom bench, checked the weather radio, and helped with dinner. We kept venison in the freezer from last season, canned tomatoes from her garden, and enough split maple stacked to make it through a hard winter, even if the propane went stupid expensive. Our old blue-tick hound, Copper, had more gray in his muzzle than blue left in his coat, and he moved like an old mechanic climbing stairs, careful and annoyed with his own joints. He slept by the back door, barked exactly when needed, and had a nose that still beat mine by a mile. Most evenings, right before lights out, I took him on one last walk around the fence and gate. It was not fear. It was habit from years of shift work and rural living. You check latches. You check fuel cans or where you left them. You make sure no branch has come down on a line. You look once while you're still awake instead of getting surprised at 2 a.m. Dana used to joke that if somebody stole our mailbox, I would probably measure the tire tracks before I called anyone. She was not wrong. One evening in late September, standing at the sink while I wrapped venison steaks in butcher paper, she said, "You know you can sit down for 10 minutes without inspecting something, right?" I told her, "I can. I just do not see the advantage." She laughed, gave me that look she had when she knew I was digging in on principle, and said, "The advantage is your blood pressure. Also, maybe your wife likes talking to your face and not the back of your head while you reorganize pliers." I said that these pliers had no system. We were living in chaos. She pointed at the drawer and said, "If this is chaos, we're going to be fine." That was our life. Low-stakes arguments about drawers and fence staples. the kind of ordinary that feels invisible while you are in it. By the first week of October, the days shortened enough that dusk came down fast, like someone pulling shade cloth across the trees. We got the first hard frost one night, and I remember scraping a clean arc on the truck windshield while Copper waited by the porch with his leash in his mouth, doing that impatient huff he did when he wanted his walk now. At work, the tract got quieter after summer crowds thinned out. Less camp noise, fewer bonfires, more wind and dry leaves. I started seeing rut sign from deer in the low swales and more scavenger tracks around gut piles left by sloppy hunters on private parcels near the boundary. That was normal October business. More movement at night, more territorial pushing, more calls from people who heard something and wanted a ranger to bless their nerves. I was used to that rhythm. The first thing that did not fit was silence. Not quiet, silence. I noticed it on a Tuesday evening just after sundown, while I stood on the porch, buttoning my work jacket. The woods behind the fence sounded pressed flat, like all the background noise had been pulled away and held somewhere else. No owl calls, no late squirrel chatter, no brush crackle from deer stepping through the edge. Copper came to the top step, stopped, and leaned back like he had hit an invisible wall. I tugged the leash once, gentle, and he planted his feet. That dog had followed me through rain, snow crust, and one memorable encounter with a cranky porcupine, and I had never seen him refuse a simple yard walk. I crouched, checked his paws, checked for burrs, checked his ears for tenderness. Nothing. He kept staring into the cedar band to the west and gave a low sound in his throat I had only heard when coyotes got too close in spring. I told myself it was scent drift. Maybe a bear had crossed earlier. Maybe a bobcat had marked the edge. Animals make choices based on information we do not have, and old dogs get cautious. I walked the line alone, light in one hand, just one loop to keep routine intact. The beam picked up frost silver on grass stems, fence wire, and the corner post by the old stump pile. Halfway down the west side, maybe 20 yards inside the tree line, I found a track run that stopped me cold. Not because it was huge, because it was deliberate, a repeating path, same arc, same spacing, like something had paced the perimeter with intent instead of wandering through it. At first glance, it read almost human at the heel, then wrong at the forefoot. The impressions were deep in the front, narrow at the back, and every few strides, there was a thin drag line where claws had scored frost crust. The stride length was too long for coyote, too linear for deer, and the pressure pattern did not match black bear weight transfer. Bears leave a roll in the print set when they amble. This had a spring to it, an in and out pressure I had seen on canids running, except this was not a run, and it was not on 4 feet. I stood there longer than I want to admit, turning my light low and high, trying to make the pattern become something familiar. The wind shifted and brought me a sour, wet fur smell, rank and earthy. Then it faded before I could track direction. The next morning I checked again in daylight before work. The line was clearer then, a ghost track circling just inside the trees, always parallel to the fence, never crossing into open yard. Garbage cans were untouched. Chicken coop at the neighbor line was fine. No torn siding, no dug-up trash, no random damage. If it was a bear, it was the most mannered bear in county history, taking evening laps like it was on a schedule. That thought would have been funny if the prints had not kept showing up. Second night, same route. Third night, same route, a little tighter, maybe 5 yards closer to the fence. Fourth night, fresher marks shoulder high on 2 cedar fence posts, 4 gouges on each, bark peeled in clean downward lines. Not clawing for food. Marking. I started narrating explanations to myself because naming possibilities is how I stay steady. Injured black bear with a bad gait. That was first. Then maybe escaped exotic from one of those private menageries people keep too quietly in the backwoods. Then maybe somebody making fake sign for laughs. I even entertained for half a minute the idea of a man on homemade stilts until I pictured someone trying that in frost-dark cedar roots and breaking both ankles before midnight. I took a tape measure out after dinner and logged stride intervals off the west line. 38 inches average between primary impressions, with variance too consistent to be random. I compared depth to archived bear prints I had photographed last spring after a sow crossed a service road in mud. Different load pattern, different toe spread, wrong balance point. Dana watched me wipe down the tape and write numbers at the kitchen table. She did not mock it. She just leaned on the counter and said, "You look like you have not slept in a week." I said, "I have slept." She tilted her head and waited. I tried again. "I have laid down with my eyes closed." She walked over, put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Earl, if you're scared, you can say scared. It is not a character flaw." I hated how fast that landed because it was true. I said, "I am not scared of a thing I can identify. I am aggravated by a pattern I cannot classify yet." She gave me a thin smile. "That is the most you answer a question in 3 days." By the second weekend of October, even the evenings that looked normal carried a tension I could feel in my jaw and hands. Copper stopped waiting by the leash hook. At sunset, he went straight under the kitchen table and stayed there, ears back, tracking sounds I could not hear. Twice I stepped onto the porch and caught that same pressed silence settling over the property, as if the whole tree line was listening harder than I was. I found new prints after a midnight rain, crisp in wet soil, where runoff crossed the north fence corner. The heel shape looked almost boot-like until the front edge showed narrow claw drags cutting through the water sheen. I found one more set of post gouges, higher this time, level with my shoulder, and then above it. I am 6'1" in work boots. I did what practical men do when practical explanations start slipping. I changed bulbs in both motion lights, checked breaker load, and laid out 2 spare trail cameras from the garage shelf, planning where to mount them at first light. I cleaned my 12 gauge and put hardened slugs in the side saddle. Not because I thought I was hunting anything, but because you do not leave tools unready when something is mapping your fence. I stood on the back steps that Sunday night, flashlight off, letting my eyes adjust to the moonless dark. The cedar line was just a black wall with depth in it. I could smell wet leaves, cold dirt, and that sour trace again. Faint and gone. Faint and gone. I told myself it was one aggressive bear with odd mechanics, and I would prove it by the book. Tracks, images, behavior log, report. Step by step. Then Copper started growling in his sleep, low and constant, and did not wake when I said his name. I stayed on the steps longer than I meant to, staring at the place where the fence disappeared into shadow, listening for movement that never came, and understanding in a way I didn't yet want to admit that whatever was out there was not wandering. It was doing rounds. I stayed there until the cold started biting through my jacket, and the porch boards cooled my boots straight through the soles. I should have gone inside when Copper started that sleep growl, locked up and called it a night. Instead, I stepped off the porch and walked 10 yards toward the west fence with my light still off, listening for any weight shift in the brush. At first, there was nothing. Then, from inside the cedars, 3 soft footfalls came in a slow line, matching my movement almost step for step. Not a rush, not retreat. Company. I clicked the flashlight on and swept low, then high. Fence posts, grass heads silver with frost, cedar trunks. No eyes, no body, no branch shake. When I held the beam steady on one trunk, the top strand of fence wire hummed and twitched, like something had brushed it from the tree side. Wind was dead still. I heard Copper bark once behind me, sharp and panicked. Then the house door rattled where he threw himself against it to get farther inside. I backed up without turning around and returned to the porch in that careful half-crouch you use around fresh-cut timber, trying not to trip while your brain runs too fast. Dana opened the door before I reached it. What happened? Something was pacing me in the cedar band. Bear? I don't know yet. She looked past me into the dark, then at my face. That is not your normal I don't know. No, I said, it is not. We locked everything, checked every window, and left the kitchen light on, which we never did because we both hate glare at night. I sat at the table with my notebook and drew a rough map of the property from memory, marking where I had heard each step and where the fence wire moved. Dana made coffee none of us needed. Copper stayed under the table with his chin on my boot and trembled in little waves. Around midnight, the motion light over the woodpile came on for 8 seconds, went dark, then came back on. I saw nothing in it except drifting mist and the hard white line of stacked splits. 30 seconds later, the light over the mudroom flicked on too, then off. Separate sensors, separate trigger points. By Monday morning, my nerves were stretched tight enough that every sound had edges. I mounted both trail cameras before sunrise, one on a maple facing the west line, and one under the lean-to aimed across the backyard toward the fence corner where prints kept bunching. I locked each case, checked batteries, ran test walks, and marked distances with orange survey tape so I could measure where anything passed. At work, I tried to hold my usual pace, but every quiet patch on the tract made me think of the silence around my own house. A chickadee burst out of a balsam while I was checking permit tags, and I flinched so hard I dropped my clipboard. That evening, I found new sign before I even made it to the gate. The perimeter track was there again, closer by another few yards, but now there were pauses in it. Deep-set impressions where whatever was circling had stood still, weight sunk forward facing the house. I measured one pause point at 19 yards from the mudroom steps. Near the north corner, I found a low cedar branch, snapped and twisted, not broken clean by snow load, bent down and peeled, as if something had used it for leverage. Under that branch, the soil held 2 impressions side by side, narrower than bare rear pads and longer than any dog print I had seen in the county, with claw marks scored ahead, like someone had dragged nails through damp sand. 3 days passed before I heard back from the district office about my first wildlife note, and by then I had filed 2 more updates with photos and measurements. My supervisor, Tom Wilkes, called me while I was replacing a washout sign near a trailhead. "Earl, I read what you sent. Looks like canid activity and maybe 1 bear crossing over old tracks. Tom, the stride is consistent and bipedal in sections. Bipedal in sections means bad substrate and overlap. I measured depth and load. It is not random. He gave a patient sigh. You have been running nights alone for weeks. October gets weird. Hunters dump carcasses, dogs roam, people spook themselves. Take one day off, sleep, and stop spiraling on sign that fits normal wildlife if you zoom out. I gripped the phone harder than I should have. You ever seen a dog put claw marks 6.5 feet high on cedar posts? Could be old marks you just noticed. They are fresh, sap still wet. Log it and move on, he said. Do not build a legend out of mating season. That call sat in my chest like a stone for the rest of the day. Tom was not a fool, and he was not cruel. He was just committed to ordinary answers so hard he could not hear the gap in his own logic. I told myself maybe he was right and I was letting one bad week turn into a pattern where none existed. I told myself if I kept collecting clean data, the shape of it would settle into something known. That is how my brain had always worked in the woods. Unknown cut, unknown lean, unknown wind. Then, enough facts, and the hazard becomes legible. Monday night turned that confidence thinner. Just after 11, Copper jerked awake from the rug and started staring at the mudroom wall like he could see through it. No bark this time. Just a low, steady rumble and spit gathering at the corners of his mouth. I killed the television and listened. A few seconds later came a soft tapping under the mudroom floor. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps like knuckles on thin wood. Not scratching. Testing. Dana froze halfway up from the couch and mouthed, "What is that?" I shook my head and lifted a finger for quiet. The tapping moved 6 feet left under the skirting and came again, faster now, then stopped. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped into the mudroom with the 12 gauge in my other hand, safety on, muzzle down. Through the small window I saw nothing beyond the reflection of my own shoulder and the dim cone from the porch bulb. Then the smell hit, sharp, wet fur musk, mixed with mud and something sour like old copper pennies. Copper whined and backed into the kitchen so hard he knocked a chair sideways. I went out the front instead of the back, circled along the porch, and swept the beam under the mudroom stairs. Empty. No possum, no raccoon, no dog, but the soil under the skirting showed fresh puncture marks in 2 rows, each puncture deep and clean as if pressed by tapered tips. I measured one to the next with my pocket rule. Too far apart for raccoon claws, too straight for random pawing. I stood there listening to my own pulse in my ears and realized I was no longer asking whether something was near us. I was asking what it was trying to learn about entry points. By the second week of October, Dana and I had fallen into a routine that felt less like living and more like running drills. Sunset meant all exterior checks done, vehicles backed in for quick exit, phones on chargers, flashlights staged at both doors, keys on the same hook every time. I hated how natural that became. You tell yourself it is temporary and practical, then one night you catch yourself counting the seconds between motion lights, and you know your world has narrowed. On Wednesday, I pulled camera cards before dawn and reviewed them at the kitchen table while Dana got ready for school. Camera 1 had deer, 2 raccoons, and me in 3 frames, checking fence tension. Camera 2 gave me nothing until 2:14 in the morning. Then 1 frame of blur at the edge of the trigger zone, a vertical streak darker than the dark behind it, with 2 pale points where eye shine should have been red or white from the infrared. The next frame was empty. Timestamp gap, 1 second. Trigger range on that camera was 25 feet. Dana leaned over my shoulder. "Can you sharpen that?" "I can zoom it until pixels turn to blocks. It could still be a person. A person would trip at least 3 frames crossing that zone unless they moved faster than the shutter and sidestepped the center. She folded her arms and stared at the screen. So what are you saying? I am saying I don't have a clean image. I am also saying nothing in this county should move that distance in 1 second without giving me another frame. She kissed the top of my head before she left. A small gesture, steady and brief, and said, "Call Bryce. If nothing else, make somebody else take a look." Bryce Nolan had been my friend since high school and now wore a deputy badge 1 county over. He met me at a gas station lot after his shift, took one look at the print photos and the blur frame, and gave me the grin I expected. "Earl, you finally got haunted by a raccoon in cosplay. Keep laughing and I'll make you measure tracks in freezing mud." He snorted. "All right, show me the famous monster route." Out at my place, he stopped smiling within 5 minutes. He crouched by the west line, set his own tape on my marks, and frowned at the depth. He stood under the gouged post and put his hand below the highest score without touching it. "That is above me," he said quietly. "Same post was clean last month." He walked the perimeter once more, slower, eyes in the trees, then said, "I can write this up as suspicious animal activity and ask wildlife to swing by. But if I say what I think, they will call it dogs." "What do you think?" He looked toward the cedar band and kept his voice low. "I think something is patterning your house. I don't know what. I don't like it." That was the only time in 20 years I heard Bryce sound unsure in uniform. He filed the note anyway. Wildlife called me that afternoon, asked for coordinates, and promised a visit when staff cleared. No one came that day. I spent the rest of Thursday doing what I knew to do, measuring again, replacing one camera with a higher trigger speed unit from the ranger office, and dusting the mudroom skirting with chalk powder so any contact marks would show direction. I checked for prank signs, boot treads, cigarette butts, candy wrappers, any human trace. Nothing. I checked for denning signs within a quarter mile, fresh scat, bedding depressions, drag trails from carcass caches. I found one half-eaten rabbit in the brush, old enough to draw flies, and a fresh deer scrape 2 properties over. Both normal. Neither explained the pattern at my fence. Around dusk, while I was tightening the north gate chain, I noticed all of the crickets had gone silent at once. Not faded, cut off. Even the highway hiss in the distance seemed to flatten. Copper stood in the doorway, body rigid, eyes fixed over my shoulder into the cedar line. I turned slowly and raised the flashlight. The beam traveled across trunks, low ferns, and one narrow opening where the fence disappeared into black understory. For a second, I saw nothing at all. Then 2 amber-green reflections snapped into view at a height level with the top of the gatepost, maybe 7 feet off the ground, perfectly still and too far apart to belong to any owl. I held the beam there, and my hands started to shake in a way I could not stop. The eyes did not blink. They did not dip or sway like an animal shifting weight. They watched. I lowered the light a few inches to check the ground line, then lifted it back. Gone. I swept left and found them again 10 yards over between 2 cedars. Same height, same distance apart. No footfall, no branch sound. No warning. Not running. Repositioned. Copper bolted backward into the house, nails scrambling on the mudroom floor. Dana shouted my name from inside. I backed to the porch, with the light fixed on that second position until the beam tremor made it useless. The eyes stayed on me for 2 more breaths and then vanished into the timber as if a switch had been flipped. The silence held for another full minute. Then, far out past the fence, I heard one low exhale, deep and wet, followed by the faint crunch of something heavy moving parallel to the house. I stayed on that porch until my forearm muscles burned from holding the light steady, listening to that heavy movement track the fence line without ever breaking into the open. The crunches came in a measured rhythm through wet leaves, then stopped at the west corner, where the cedars thickened. I waited for another step and got nothing. Just dark. Just that flattened silence. Dana called my name again, sharper this time, and I backed through the mudroom door without taking my eyes off the trees. I locked the deadbolt, set the chain, and pulled the curtain shut with my left hand while keeping the shotgun in my right. She stood barefoot on the kitchen tile, phone in one hand, face pale but steady. Tell me exactly what you saw. Eyes, amber green. 7 feet up, maybe more. Too wide apart for anything I know. Could it have been 2 animals lined up? No. She swallowed. You answered that too fast. I measured that gatepost last spring when I restrung wire. 6.5 feet. Those eyes were above it. Copper stayed jammed between the table legs, shoulders trembling, not barking anymore. His ears were pinned so flat they looked painted onto his skull. I had seen him stand down to coyotes and once square off at a black bear cub, while I yelled like an idiot for him to retreat. I had never seen him try to make himself smaller. I checked every window from inside, lights off in the house so I could look out without blinding myself on reflections. The yard looked ordinary in fragments: woodpile, truck, fence posts, grass silvering over with frost. But the tree line had a depth to it that kept swallowing the beam. Twice I caught myself holding my breath for so long my ribs ached. I told myself eyeshine can play tricks with distance and height, that terrain dips and rises, that your brain invents structure when fear gets traction. I told myself that over and over because the alternative had no slot in the catalog I trusted. At 12:18 by the microwave clock, the west motion light snapped on. Nothing visible in its cone. Then the north light came on 2 seconds later, farther away, as if something had moved across the blind strip between sensors faster than the trigger delay could track. I went to the mudroom window and parted the curtain by a finger width. 2 reflections appeared again at the very edge of the light spill, not in it, just beyond, fixed and level. When I widened the gap to get a better angle, they were gone. I swept the beam left. Nothing. Right. Nothing. Then they came back 30 yards down slope near the north corner. Same color, same spacing, no sound of brush giving way, no branch shake, no thump of landing. It was like seeing a pair of marker lights, lifted and moved by a machine that never touched ground. Dana was beside me before I realized she had crossed the kitchen. Do not open that door. I am not opening it. What are we doing? I kept my eyes on the fence line, staying inside, logging every time in position. If this is a predator pattern, I want behavior, not panic. She nodded once, jaw tight. I am calling Bryce. Call him. Then call dispatch and request wildlife officer response for an unknown large animal. Use those words. She stepped into the hall for signal, and I heard her voice steady itself into practical phrases. Address repeated sightings, height estimate. No direct contact yet, armed homeowner remaining inside. I hated hearing my own house turned into an incident script, but the structure helped. It gave us rails to hold. Bryce called back first, breathless like he was pulling on his jacket while he talked. I'm off duty, but I can drive out. 25 minutes. Do not run siren, do not come hot. You seeing it now? On and off, eyes only. He went quiet for one beat. Stay inside, Earl, I mean it. Already there? Dispatch called next and said wildlife had no immediate unit in our sector until morning. The deputy on shift could swing by if the animal entered the yard. I wanted to argue that it had owned the perimeter for a week, but I bit that back and said we would hold position. At 12:41, the eyes showed in the south cedar break, farther than before, almost at the old stump pile where the fence turned. At 12:43, they appeared west again. I marked each sighting on my notebook map with times and estimated distances, same way I logged hazard trees after a blowdown. The discipline kept my hands from shaking as hard. I tried to convince myself there were two separate animals, one west and one south, which would explain the movement without asking my brain to accept silent repositioning. Then both reflections appeared at once, for less than a second. One pair high west, one pair low north, and the low pair vanished, like it had been a trick of angle. I could not trust my own perception enough to claim certainty. I could not dismiss it either. By the time Bryce's truck lights rolled up the gravel lane, a fine sleet had started, soft needles against the windows. I met him at the front door and kept him from stepping out of the porch wash with one hand on his sleeve. Do not leave this light. He gave me a hard look. You are white as paper. Look at Copper. Bryce looked down at the dog, then back at me. All right, show me. I pointed to the last sighting marks in my notebook, then to the west line through the glass. We stood shoulder to shoulder in the dark kitchen. Two men who had spent most of our lives outdoors, pretending walls were enough. Dana gave him coffee and he did not touch it. For 15 minutes, nothing moved except sleet. Then the north light tripped, and the eyes appeared at full height between two cedars maybe 60 yards out. Bryce whispered, That is too high. I know. He raised his duty light and trained it on the same spot. The reflections held for a breath, then dipped out. His beam caught empty trunks. A second later, without any sound crossing the gap, the same eyes flashed at the west fence opening near the gate chain. Bryce swore under his breath and took one step toward the mudroom before stopping himself. Dana said, quiet and firm, No heroes. He exhaled through his nose. No heroes. He stayed another 20 minutes, called the on-duty deputy from my kitchen, and filed an immediate assist request that got logged, but did not produce a second unit before 1 in the morning. When he finally left, he backed down the lane with his spotlight sweeping both sides, and I watched those white arcs disappear into drizzle until the taillights were gone. The eyes did not return after that. Not while I was awake, anyway. I sat in a straight chair facing the mudroom door until dawn, shotgun across my knees, listening to sleet tick against the roof and Copper whimper in his sleep. Morning made everything look smaller and dumber, like fear had overbuilt the whole night. Then I stepped outside and found fresh impressions laid clean around the same loop, over sleet crust that had started after Bryce arrived. That meant it had kept circling after he left, close enough to hear our voices through glass. On the west side, I found one print set beside the fence where the ground dipped, and the depth drove the air out of me. Whatever made it had loaded weight forward and down with enough force to punch through crust into packed clay. I set my tape and photographed scale against a marked ruler. The fore impression was long, narrow at the rear, wide at the front where claw tips had cut. The stride to the next was 40 inches. I sent everything to Tom and Wildlife again before breakfast. Tom replied with 2 lines. Document and avoid direct engagement. We will review when staff available. Wildlife left a voicemail saying they could send 2 officers by late afternoon for a sign assessment. They came at 4:30, polite and wary, took samples from 1 gouged cedar post, cast 2 partial prints, and avoided saying what they thought. One officer, Keller, stood under the highest claw mark and said, "We do not have a standard form for this geometry." Then he looked at me like he wished he had not said it out loud. That night nothing showed on the fence. No eyes, no motion lights, no tapping under the mudroom. The relief should have helped. Instead it felt staged, like a pause inserted on purpose. I checked the cameras every hour until 3 in the morning and caught only rain and 1 fox threading the north line. I told myself the patrol from Wildlife had pushed it off. I told myself predators adjust routes when pressured. I told myself data over dread, evidence over story. It sounded good in my head and hollow in my chest. 2 nights later, cloud cover broke, and the moon came out behind thin haze, bright enough to give the pasture and back fence a dull silver edge. Dana had gone to bed early with one of her migraines, and I was in the mudroom cleaning grit from my boots when Copper lifted his head from the rug and stared at the back window so hard his body seemed to lock in place. No growl this time, just complete focus. I killed the mudroom light and looked out. At first I took it for a shadow cast by the leaning spruce near the north corner. Then it moved. A vertical shape detached from the tree line and paced parallel to the far fence, maybe 35 yards out, where moonlight hit open ground between cedar clumps. It was not clear enough for detail, but clear enough for scale. The top strand of that fence sat at 6.5 feet, because I had set every post myself. The moving shape's shoulders rode higher than that wire, even while hunched. It crossed 1 panel length in 4 strides. Each stride had a forward-loaded spring in it, hips high, upper body pitched into motion, not the side roll of a bear and not the upright balance of a man. The rear leg angle was wrong for human knees, bent back like a canid set to launch, with the heel lifted offline. The arms, if they were arms, hung long and did not swing in a human rhythm. They counterweighted subtle and controlled, like stabilizers. I eased the window open a fraction to listen. No branch breaks, no snorts, no pad slap in mud. Just 1 faint scrape every 3rd step, like claw tips kissing wire or stone. The shape reached the pasture corner post, paused, then turned with a tight pivot that should have thrown any heavy animal off balance. It did not wobble. It simply reversed direction and paced back. Same route, same measured cadence, as if following a boundary, only it could see. My skin went cold so fast it felt like dropping into lake water in March. I clicked my flashlight on and hit the beam through the glass. The light caught fence wire, mist, and nothing else. When I switched it off, the silhouette was farther left than it should have been, almost to the west bend. I hit the beam again. Empty. Off again. There. Standing still now. Full vertical profile against pale cloud. Head shape tapered forward in a way no bear carried. Neck too upright. Shoulders massive. I heard Dana behind me in the hallway. "Earl, stay back." She came to the kitchen doorway anyway, took 1 look at my face, and did not argue. "You can see it?" shape only. Animal? I kept watching the fence line. I do not have a known category. She gripped the door frame until her knuckles blanched. Do we call 911 now? Not yet unless it comes inside the yard. That feels like a bad threshold. It is the one dispatch we'll respond to fastest. She stood with me in the dark for maybe 2 minutes while the silhouette paced out and back 3 more times, never crossing the wire, never fully turning broadside into clear light, always keeping that parallel track like it was tracing us in charcoal. Then cloud thickened over the moon and the pasture went black. When the sky cleared again, the line was empty. I waited another 10 minutes, then stepped onto the porch with a shotgun and a headlamp, keeping the muzzle low. Listening, Dana stayed in the doorway with the cordless phone and the truck keys. Copper refused to cross the threshold. I walked to the fence corner and swept both directions. No eyes, no movement. The only sound was distant highway noise and my own breath. At the west panel, I found 3 fresh wire vibrations, still singing faintly against the staple points, as if something had brushed them moments earlier. In the mud below, there were partial impressions, 2 smeared for clean photos, long fore pressure and narrow rear, stride longer than my natural step. I marked them anyway with flags and took what I could. Back inside, I sat at the table and stared at the notebook map until the lines blurred. Dana set a mug by my hand and waited. I tried to assemble a sentence that did not sound like panic and landed on the truth I could carry. I can fit eyeshine into bad angles, I said. I can fit one print into misread substrate. I cannot fit that gate into anything in these woods. She asked, Then what are we dealing with? I looked at the window over the sink where the dark gave nothing back and answered in a voice that did not sound like mine. Something that has been studying this house. I spent the rest of that night building explanations and knocking each one down before it could settle. Big bear with spinal deformity, wrong leg mechanics, escaped wolf-dog hybrid, wrong height and posture, human in a suit, wrong stride, wrong silence, wrong mass. By 4 a.m, I was still at the table, pen in my hand, trying to write a version that stayed inside normal limits. I kept telling myself, moonlight distorts, fear enlarges, memory lies. I kept telling myself, if I stayed disciplined, this would collapse into a known animal with a known pattern and a known response. When dawn finally showed up thin and gray over the cedars, I had not convinced myself of anything except this. Whatever had paced our perimeter was real, it was large, and it was choosing when to be seen. Dana read that in my face before I said it out loud. She slid into the chair across from me, wrapped both hands around her mug, and watched me like she was waiting for a verdict. We are not doing another night like this blind, she said. We are not, I answered. I am moving the fast camera to the woodpile lane and setting one low by the mudroom skirting. I want contact points, not guesses. You are going to work? I looked toward the window where the tree line was turning from black to dull blue. I have to check in at least. Then I am coming back before dark. She nodded once. I will call the school and take a personal day. Copper finally crawled out from under the table when dawn was full, but he would not go farther than the mudroom threshold. I clipped his leash anyway and stood there with him while he leaned backward and stared past me into the yard. The old dog shook, not in quick, nervous tremors this time, but in deep muscle waves, like cold had reached into his bones. I took him back inside, shut the door, and Went out alone. The ground kept records better than people. Fresh impressions, tracked the west arc exactly where I expected, then tightened at the north corner until they were almost parallel with the house wall. Near the lean-to, I found one print set close enough to the woodpile that a forelimb, if that was what it had, could have reached between stacked splits. The print depth there was deeper than the rest, as if it had paused and loaded weight forward. The claws had cut 4 clean crescents into wet soil. I set a ruler, photographed measured stride. 41 inches on that segment. Not running. Walking with control. I moved the camera, changed batteries, and added 2 small tricks from old anti-theft jobs around logging sites. I dusted the mudroom skirting with a fresh coat of chalk line powder so directional contact would show. Then I ran black thread at ankle height between porch post and clipped 3 empty aluminum tags to it that would rattle if something brushed through. Crude but silent until triggered. I also set 1 strip of duct tape sticky side up under the lowest skirting gap, hoping for hair or fibers if anything probed again. By late morning, I had sent updated photos to Tom, copied wildlife, and called Officer Keller directly from my truck. He answered on the 3rd ring. Keller. Earl Reynolds, you were out yesterday with the casts. I remember. You get more sign? More and closer. I need somebody to see this before rain takes it. He was quiet long enough that I heard office noise behind him, keyboard taps and a radio murmur. I can be there at 1500 if the road unit clears me. No promises. I will take maybe over no. He almost laughed but did not. Keep your doors secured. Do not track it if visibility drops. At the tract office, I did the minimum, logged trailhead checks, handed off 2 permit issues, and ignored Tom's look when he saw my eyes. He pulled me aside by the map board. You look rough, Earl. I am running on coffee and adrenaline. I read your latest note. You are escalating language. Because it is escalating behavior. He rubbed his jaw. I cannot dispatch a cryptid task force. I am not asking for that. I am asking for temporary nighttime patrol near my road and a wildlife trap unit staged within range. He gave me the same careful bureaucratic tone he used with angry campers. Put it in writing. I will forward. That is what I can do. I hated him for 10 seconds, then hated myself for it. He was trapped in procedure, and I was trying to force urgency through a system built to flatten anomalies. I signed out before noon and drove home through steady low cloud, windshield wipers ticking like a metronome that never let my pulse settle. Keller made it just after 3 in an unmarked truck with a county wildlife emblem on the door. He walked the west line with me, took fresh photos, and crouched by the deep woodpile print without speaking. At the mudroom, he examined the chalk, thread, and tape strip, then looked up at the skirting vents. This thing is testing structures, he said. Could be den-seeking behavior, could be predatory assessment. Predatory of what? Deer do not live under my mudroom. He kept his eyes on the vent gap. I am saying it is not random transit. Dana stood in the doorway with a notebook and asked him, If we call tonight, do we get anyone in real time? Keller exhaled through his nose. You call and mention active attempted entry, yes. If it is perimeter movement only, response depends on available units. He glanced back to me. I am recommending hard lighting on all sides and immediate retreat plan. Vehicle backed for exit. Keys on person, not hook. After he left, the sky turned the color of old steel and wind came in from the lake line, cold and wet. A rain squall rolled over around dusk, fast and mean, hammering the roof and flattening the garden beds Dana had just buttoned down for fall. The yard became a moving curtain of water where distance collapsed to 30 feet. Motion lights hate that kind of weather. They blink at every shifting sheet. I expected nuisance triggers. I did not expect what came at 9:17. The woodpile light snapped on and held steady, no flicker. I was already in the mudroom, pulling on boots for a quick check of the generator housing, before the worst of the wind hit. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw a shape pass between the light and the stacked splits. Not fast, not blurred, just there and then, partly gone, as if it had chosen the one angle where my view was broken by the doorframe. I killed the interior bulb and took one step closer to the glass. For maybe 3 seconds, maybe less, the rain thinned enough for a side view. An elongated muzzle projected from ahead, carried too high and too forward, ears pinned flat against dark, wet fur. The chest was broad and heavy, but the waist narrowed hard behind the rib line like a built runner, not a bear barrel. One forelimb lifted and touched the skirting with a deliberate 2-point tap, claws pale against the mud-dark boards, long and slightly curved like ivory hooks. Not paws, not hands the way a person has hands, a jointed structure that could grip and rake with intention. Water ran off the fur in ropes, and the coat looked matted in plaits over the shoulders, shorter along the flank. I saw the throat flex before I heard anything, then a deep, wet pull of breath through teeth, close enough that the glass gave back a soft vibration. The light over the mudroom door fired at the same instant, washing the scene in hard white. It turned toward me. I did not get a full face, but I got enough to wreck every easy answer I had left. The eye was amber with a green cast from the light, set forward more than a canine profile should allow, with a focused stillness that read as appraisal, not panic. The upper lip lifted over long canines as water dripped from the muzzle tip. The forelimb left the skirting and dropped soundlessly. Then it moved out of the cone in one smooth shift. No crashing retreat, no scramble. Gone into rain and dark as if the yard itself had swallowed it. Dana was beside me with the phone already up. "Tell me." Partial visual at the mudroom right here. It touched the wall. Did it try to come in? It tested. It did not commit. She started relaying to dispatch while I kept watch, every nerve stretched so tight my fingers tingled. I heard my own voice in the background giving plain descriptors I would have mocked a month earlier. Very large, unknown, bipedal canid type. Long claws, upright posture, actively probing structure. Dispatch said a deputy would stage at the county road intersection until weather eased enough to approach safely. That was 13 minutes of waiting with rain hammering the windows and copper howling from the hallway like he was hearing something under our floor again. When the deputy finally rolled up, I did not ask him to sweep the tree line. We both knew that was theater in weather like that. He checked exterior with his spotlight, saw no movement, took my statement at the kitchen table while water dripped from his hat brim onto my floor, and advised what everyone advised when they had no category for the threat. Stay inside. Call again at first sign. After he left, the squall weakened to steady rain. I went out in full gear with Dana at the door and the shotgun low. The chalk line on the skirting held a clear contact pattern this time. 2 angled swipes, upward then lateral, roughly 12 inches apart. each ending in a hooked drag, as if claws had tested purchase, and then released. The duct tape strip under the vent had something stuck to it. 3 coarse hairs, dark at the shaft, with lighter tips, longer than dog guard hairs and stiffer than deer. I lifted the strip with tweezers into a clean jar. At the porch thread line, 2 tags were missing. We found 1 tag in the grass by the steps. The second was gone. I stood there in rain drip from the eaves, scanning the fence and tree mouths beyond, and felt fear turn into a colder thing. Not panic, pattern recognition with teeth in it. This was not an animal blundering into human space and getting spooked by light. It had approached through weather that hid it, selected my weakest wall, and made controlled contact while watching for response. It had done this while staying just outside clear identification range. That meant process. That meant intent. I slept in a chair again with boots on. At dawn, the rain cleared and left the yard smelling of mud, cedar oil, and that rank, wet fur trace that clung low to the ground. I started at the mudroom and followed sign west. 30 yards inside the cedar band, on a game trail I used for firewood checks, I found the missing aluminum tag hanging from a broken branch at my eye level. Twisted once through the hole, secured so it would spin in wind and click against bark. Nobody had walked there in the night except it. I brought Dana to see it because I did not trust myself to describe it without sounding unhinged. She looked at the branch, then at me, and her face changed in a way I had not seen in 11 years together. Not confusion, not disbelief, acceptance of danger. "It is leaving messages," she said quietly. I wanted to disagree. I wanted to call it random snagging and lucky placement. But the branch was 6 feet up, clean of storm debris, and the tag had been threaded, not caught. I had done enough field rigging in my life to know a deliberate hitch when I saw one. By the second night after the squall, the behavior shifted again. No perimeter loop in the far trees, no broad pacing where I could map it. Instead, we got near passes along the house wall where cameras had blind strips between cones. The north motion light tripped without showing body. 30 seconds later, the south tripped. Then silence. At 11:06, my truck alarm chirped once and shut off. I went out at first light and found muddy smear marks on the driver's side door handle and 1 long, shallow score across the mirror housing. Not enough to break anything. Enough to tell me it could touch what it wanted. At work the next morning, I noticed a sign where there should have been none. 2 deep impressions in soft shoulder gravel by the Ranger equipment shed, half a county away from my house, and outside any known movement corridor for large predators. 1 print was partial, the other clean enough for claw tip marks. I measured on reflex, then stopped with the tape in my hand and looked around the empty lot while a pressure built behind my ribs. I had driven straight from home to work in daylight. No stops, no detours. If those prints were fresh, and they were, then either I was seeing patterns where none existed, or the thing had expanded its map to include me, not just my property. I called Bryce from the shed and kept my voice level. "You free to talk?" 2 minutes. "What happened?" "I have matching sign at the tracked lot. Same geometry. This is no longer just my fence." He did not joke this time. "You think it followed your truck?" "I think it is tracking routine." A long pause, then. "Pack a go bag today. Papers, meds, cash, keys, dog supplies. Keep it by the door. I am serious, Earl. I am past pretending this is overreaction." When I got home that afternoon, Dana had already done it. 2 duffels by the mudroom bench, Copper's leash clipped on top, lockbox with documents zipped into the side pocket. She had also moved 3 framed photos off the living room wall because the glass reflections made night watch harder. Practical changes, quiet, relentless, all signal and no drama. We ate dinner without the weather radio on. Every small house sound carried farther in the silence. Fork against plate, fridge compressor cycling, Copper's nails clicking once when he shifted position. At 8:52, the west light came on. At 8:53, the back camera feed glitched into static for 4 seconds, then returned. At 8:54, something struck the underside of the mudroom floor with one heavy thump that rattled the boot tray and sent Copper scrambling down the hall. I told Dana to move to the bathroom with the phone while I took position by the kitchen corner, where I could see both mudroom and back window. My heart was hammering hard enough to blur edges. I forced myself into the Ranger cadence that had kept me alive around blowdowns and bad weather for years. Assess, breathe, choose. From outside, just beyond the wall, came 3 slow taps against the skirting. Pause. 2 taps. The same pattern as before. It knew exactly where we were. I eased the safety off and pointed to the hallway without taking my eyes off the mudroom wall. Bathroom now. Call dispatch and stay low. Dana did not argue. She took Copper's collar, half dragged him across the kitchen tile when he froze, and disappeared down the hall with the cordless and her cell both in hand. I heard the bathroom door close. Then her voice flattened into emergency cadence through wood and fan noise. Address first, active attempted entry, armed homeowner, unknown large animal at structure. The taps came again, closer to the door frame this time. 3. Pause. 2. Then one long scrape that traveled from left to right across the skirting like a nail being drawn over thin tin. I shifted to the corner where I had hard cover from the fridge wall and clear sight on both the mudroom door and the back window. The house felt too small. Every room suddenly just angles and choke points. Dispatch patched through on speaker from Dana's phone so I could answer without moving. A woman's voice, controlled but tight, asked, "Can you confirm the animal is attempting entry right now?" "Yes." "Any visual?" "Not yet. Contact at wall and skirting. Units are en route. Nearest deputy is 18 minutes out. Wildlife officers are unavailable in your immediate grid." 18 minutes might as well have been a county line away. I gave her our gate code, our lane landmarks, and told her where I would be in the house if they arrived hot. She told us to shelter in place unless breach occurred, then line went thin with static and clipped out for 2 seconds, came back, clipped out again. Storm residue and rural towers. I switched to my radio handset from the Ranger truck charger and called Bryce direct. No answer. Called again. Voicemail. Another impact hit the mudroom floor from below, heavier than the first, enough to rattle the coat hooks and send one set of keys skittering off the bench. Copper started howling from the bathroom, high and raw, then cut off with a choked whine. The sound shook me worse than the thumps. I backed 2 steps, opened the cabinet beside the pantry, and pulled the road flare bundle I'd staged that morning along with spare batteries and duct tape. I snapped one flare free and set it on the counter within reach. My chest hurt from shallow breathing. I forced air down slow and did inventory the way I did around hung-up trees in logging days. Weapon loaded, side saddle full, keys in pocket, boots on, Truck backed in. Gate chain pre-loosened at dusk. Dana aware of fallback route. A crack came from outside, sharp and dry, then another. Fence wire under stress. I knew that sound like. I knew my own name. The top strand took load, released, took load again. Not weather. Wait. Dana, I called, low but clear. If I say move, you move. No bags. No second trip. Her voice came back through the bathroom door, steady and thin at once. Understood. I heard dispatch faint through her phone. Mom, stay on with me. Tell me if sounds change. They changed fast. The north motion light tripped, then the west, then both went dead at once. Total dark outside the windows. Half a second later, our kitchen lights blinked hard, surged, then dropped out completely. The refrigerator compressor died mid-hum. Weather radio went silent. Power cut. I swore and reached for the lantern switch mounted by the pantry. Got a dim battery glow that made the room look underwater. Through that weak light, I saw chalk dust puff from the base of the mudroom wall in 3 short bursts as something struck the skirting from outside with controlled force. It was trying the same points it had tested in rain. I moved to the mudroom interior door and listened with my ear near the jamb. Wet breathing on the other side, close enough to fog the lower pain in pulses, not panting. Measured pulls and releases, deep in the chest. Then a click at the exterior handle, delicate and precise, followed by a second click, as if claws or some narrow grip had found metal and was learning its range. The handle depressed halfway and sprang back. A sound like wire snapping rang from the yard, then one heavy body impact against the back fence section behind the truck. Wood popped. Chain links rattled down the run. Dispatch voice rose from the bathroom phone. Sir, we lost your house ping for 1 moment. Repeat your status. Power is out. Perimeter breach in progress. I looked at the black window and felt the room tilt toward decision. I am starting generator now. Can you do that safely? No, I said, and opened the mudroom interior door. Cold air hit me with wet leaf smell and that sour fir musk so strong it stung my throat. I kept low, shotgun up, and stepped onto the mudroom threshold, using the lantern spill behind me as backlight while my headlamp stayed off to preserve night sight. The exterior door was still latched. Mud smeared across the lower panel in 4 diagonal lines. The handle twitched once more from outside. I did not wait for a full pull. I cut left through the interior utility passage toward the generator closet we had built off the garage wall, hands moving by memory in dark. My shoulder clipped the shelf, knocked a box of screws to the floor. Metal scattering. From outside came a guttural chuff that answered the noise, then rapid footfalls along the siding toward where I was moving. It was tracking us by sound inside our own house. I reached the generator panel, yanked the manual start, heard the diesel cough, catch, and settle into a hard mechanical roar that vibrated the studs. 3 seconds later, the floodlights we had mounted on Keller's advice slammed on across the backyard and side lane in white sheets. The roar and light bought me one clear beat to act. I struck the flare cap, got a burst of red magnesium glare, and pushed back through the mudroom just as the exterior door bowed inward under a hit from outside. The deadbolt held. The frame complained in a long, splintering groan. I ripped the door open from inside and threw the lit flare in a low arc toward the truck turnaround. It bounced once on gravel and rolled, hissing red smoke and sparks. Floodlights and flare together turned the yard into a brutal stage with no shadow soft enough to hide in. That was when I saw it fully. It stood beside my truck at maybe 20 feet, half turned toward the mudroom, and for one suspended second, both of us were fixed in the same impossible geometry. Upright, it was near 8 feet, shoulders as broad as a doorway, torso dense through chest and back, then tapering to a narrower waist that sat over hind legs bent like a giant canid under constant spring tension. Dark fur covered most of it, thick and matted over the shoulders, thinner and slick along the ribs where rain had plastered it down. The forearms were too long by human proportion, heavy with muscle, ending in jointed hands that were not hands, long metacarpal shapes tipped with pale claws near 3 inches that caught flare light like bone. Its head was wolf-like, but carried on an unnervingly upright neck, muzzle elongated, nostrils flaring, lips pulled just enough to show wet canines and flat grinding teeth behind them. Saliva hung in strands from the lower jaw and swung when it shifted. Ears sat high and angled back. The eyes were amber with a green edge in the flood glare, set forward with a focus I had only seen in predators, committing to distance and angle, not in startled animals caught in light. The skin around the eyes looked dark and tight, giving that stare a deliberate, assessing quality that made my stomach drop harder than the size did. It did not roar or posture big the way bears do when bluffing. It watched my hands. It watched the shotgun. It watched the door behind me where Dana was. Then it moved one step right, testing for line around the truck, and I saw the hind feet plant on digitigrade structure, heel lifted high, toes spread for traction on wet gravel. Every movement was controlled, almost economical. No wasted bounce for an animal that large. The smell hit me in a full wave, wet fur and rot and metallic tang, close enough now that it coated the back of my tongue. I fired one warning shot into gravel 10 feet to its left. The blast broke the yard open, thunder bouncing off siding and cedar trunks. My ears rang immediately high and sharp. The creature flinched at the percussion but did not break. It dropped lower, weight loading into those bent hind legs, and came straight at the mudroom in 2 long strides that ate the distance faster than anything that size had a right to move. I planted, found the lead shoulder in the flare red and flood white, and fired the second slug. Impact hit, with a heavy, meaty thud and a crack as body met truck quarter panel. The creature twisted mid-lunge, slammed sideways into the driver door, and skidded on gravel, claws raking metal in a scream of steel. It did not go down clean. It rolled, caught itself on one forelimb, and snapped its head toward me with a snarl that was more breath than sound. "Move!" I shouted into the house. "Now!" Dana came through the mudroom, carrying only the phone and Copper's leash. Copper half running, half sliding, eyes rolled wide. I backed toward the truck's rear passenger door with the shotgun up and chambered another slug by feel. The creature tried to rise and failed on one side, shoulder dropping. It pivoted anyway, dragging that side for a beat, then compensating with raw upper body power and coming low around the truck nose toward us. I fired a third round at the ground between us to check its line and bought one heartbeat of hesitation. Dana yanked the rear door open, shoved Copper inside, climbed after him. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and hit lock as claws struck metal at the rear quarter with a jarring bang that rocked the cab. The engine turned once, caught. I threw it in drive, stomped throttle, and drove through the side gate chain instead of wasting seconds with latch and post. The gate tore free in a spray of staples and wire. We hit the lane hard enough to bounce Dana into the door, then straightened onto gravel toward County Road 22 and the Ranger substation 3 miles east. Dana stayed on dispatch speaker, voice shaking but functional. "We are evacuating, heading east to State Substation. It is behind us. It is behind us." I checked mirrors between potholes and saw at once at the tree line parallel to the lane, running in and out of floodlit breaks, where neighboring yards opened. Even wounded, it matched us for maybe 200 yards, shoulders rolling above brush, then dropped back into timber where the road cut turned and thick cedar blocked sight. By the middle mile, my hands were cramping on the wheel. Glass from the mudroom blast had sliced my left forearm somewhere in the chaos. Blood slicked my wrist, but not enough to lose function. Dana pressed a dish towel from the go bag against it while still giving dispatch landmarks. Copper lay wedged on the floorboard, trembling so hard his tags rattled like loose bolts. The substation lights came up ahead like a harbor. Sodium lamps. Lot floods. 2 county units already angled by the entrance with doors open. I did not fully stop until I was inside the gate and against the cinder block wall under full light. Then my body quit pretending and started shaking so hard I could barely set park. Deputies moved in fast, weapons out, then down when they saw us, and no immediate pursuit in the lot. 1 medic unit arrived 4 minutes later. They wrapped my forearm, checked Dana's breathing while she fought to slow it, and took our statements in pieces because my hearing kept dropping in and out from gunfire in confined space. Bryce reached us near midnight, still in plain clothes under a borrowed outer vest, face drawn tight when he saw the door gouges and side panel dents on my truck. He said only, "You made it," and put a hand on my shoulder long enough for me to stay upright. Just before dawn, under overcast light that made every color look tired, Keller and 2 wildlife officers escorted us back to the property for evidence sweep while it was still fresh. At the impact site by the truck, they found dark blood spatter low on gravel, a smeared drag mark where the body had pivoted, and clumps of coarse dark fur caught in torn metal at shoulder height. Keller bagged samples, photographed every angle, measured stride from the exit line into Cedars, then looked up at me with that same restrained expression he had worn 2 days earlier. "No known match in our field guides," he said, "but you hit it. Hard." From that morning forward, the perimeter loop stopped. No new tracks, no taps, no eyes in the cedar band. The thing that had mapped our fence for 2 weeks was gone from our property, and it never made another round. By the time Keller finished bagging the last fir clump from my truck door seam, the sun was up and thin behind cloud, and the yard looked like a work site after an accident. Tape flags in wet grass, boot prints layered over boot prints, cameras still zip-tied to trees, like they belonged to a different house. I stood by the mudroom steps with gauze taped down my left forearm and realized I could not stop scanning the cedar band, even with 3 armed officers walking it in broad daylight. One of the deputies said, "Earl, you are safe right now." I nodded because he was trying to help, but my eyes stayed on the fence break, where the top wire had snapped. Dana sat in the passenger seat of the wildlife truck wrapped in a wool blanket, medic mask hanging loose under her chin, breathing slow in counts, the way they had coached her at the substation. Copper was curled against her thigh, still shaking in little tremors whenever a radio cracked. We did not go back inside the house that morning except to collect essentials. I stepped in once for wallets, meds, and Dana's school bag she kept by the hall table, and the smell of burnt flare residue mixed with wet fur hit me so hard I backed out, gagging. The mudroom doorframe was split where it had bowed. The skirting bore those same 2 angled claw swipes in chalk dust, and 1 crescent of pale claw material had sheared off in the groove. Keller pried it free with forceps and sealed it in a tube. He took the duct tape strip from my jar with the 3 coarse hairs, logged it, and had me sign the chain form on the hood of his truck, while rain started again in a fine mist. At the substation after noon, I sat on a metal chair under fluorescent lights and shook so hard, coffee sloshed out of the cup onto my jeans. My ears rang from the shotgun blast in that enclosed space, high and constant, and every door latch sound made my shoulders jump. A medic cleaned the forearm cut again and told me I needed stitches if it reopened. Dana had stopped crying by then, but she kept asking for the bathroom key even when she did not need it, just to confirm she could lock 1 door between us and outside. Shotgun does strange bookkeeping. I slept 0 hours that first day and maybe 40 minutes the next. At dawn on day 2, I checked every lock at the substation 3 times, then asked Bryce to drive us back with Keller for 1 more evidence pass before weather erased what remained. We found no new tracks, no fresh pacing loop, no taps. The yard held old sign in silence, and that silence felt earned instead of waiting. 3 days later, I sat in a county office and filed the formal report under dangerous unknown animal encounter. I did not write cryptid, monster, or anything that would send the file straight into a joke bin. I attached everything: my notebook maps with time marks, stride measurements, camera stills including the blur frame and the static glitch segment, dispatch case numbers, Bryce's suspicious activity report, wildlife photos, cast records, and the sample list. I included the threaded aluminum tag from the branch as behavioral evidence and noted it had been recovered at eye level on a clean break, no storm snag. The clerk read the header twice and said, "Careful, you are choosing unknown canid type instead of bear or feral dog." "Yes," I said, "because those labels do not fit the geometry." Tom met me outside the office afterward by the vending machines. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 weeks before. "I should have pushed harder when you first called," he said. I looked at him for a long second. What I needed then was night patrol and a trap team. What I got was rest advice. He took that hit without argument. "You were right." That was as close to an apology as Tom ever gave anyone. He never told me he believed every detail. He did sign off on my incident packet without softening language, and in his world that counted. The lab call came 10 days after submission. A technician from the state facility said the hair and claw residue were inconclusive due to mixed canid markers and environmental contamination. I asked what mixed meant. She said Achemox does domestic and wild signatures present, insufficient for species-level confidence. 2 weeks after that, I received a notice that the blood swab chain from 1 transport batch had been compromised during transfer between regional storage and central intake. Retest unavailable. Case status: unresolved wildlife incident. I read that letter at my kitchen table and laughed once, a dry, ugly sound I did not recognize as mine. Not because it was funny, because it fit the pattern exactly. Just enough evidence to confirm danger, never enough to force a clean category. Bryce came by that evening with takeout and sat on my porch without pretending normal. Off the record, he said, I asked around. 2 old calls in adjacent counties had track notes like yours. Both closed as probable large canine misidentification. No body, no follow-up. Did anyone ever tell those homeowners? He shook his head. Paperwork made it disappear. Keller called me once more before winter set. His voice stayed neutral, but he finally said the line he had been holding back since his first visit. I have worked 20 years in field response, he said. I have no manual entry for what hit your property. You did the correct thing at each decision point. That mattered more than I expected. By the 3rd week of November, Dana and I sat across from a realtor in our living room, with the split mudroom frame still visible behind plastic sheeting. We accepted an offer below market because we were done negotiating with darkness. Signing that stack of papers felt like admitting defeat and choosing survival at the same time. Both were true. I took early retirement from ranger duty 6 weeks after the attack. At the tract office, I turned in keys, badge, and radio. Tom asked if I wanted to stay on days only. No field patrols, I said. No night calls, I am done. He nodded and did not push. We moved to a denser neighborhood outside Traverse City, where houses sat close enough that porch lights overlapped, and somebody was always walking a dog after dinner. First week in the new place, I reinforced both exterior doors with steel strike plates, installed thermal cameras at all corners, wired motion alarms to separate circuits, and mounted a quick access long gun safe in the bedroom closet. I hated every minute of that install because it marked the line between who I had been and who I became. But I slept for 4 straight hours the night it was finished, and that was the first real sleep since October. Dana and I changed as a pair. We stayed together, but easy routine turned into structured vigilance. She took first sleep block, I took second. At sunset, we ran a check protocol out loud: doors, windows, cameras, vehicle fuel, phones charged, keys clipped. It sounded like an emergency drill because it was. Over time, the intensity eased, yet the framework stayed. Copper adjusted slower than either of us. For months, he would not go into any backyard after dark, even in town with street lights and fences tight. We stopped forcing it and shifted all evening walks to full daylight. He got his appetite back by January and his old stubborn huff by spring. I work now as a daytime equipment maintenance tech for a county contractor, mostly loaders, mowers, and hydraulic systems. Concrete yards, open bay doors, co-workers within shouting distance. No remote patrols. No overnight timber checks. My hands still no tools, and that helps. Mechanical problems have causes you can trace. Once a week I sit with a therapist in an office above a pharmacy and do the unglamorous work of lowering hypervigilance without surrendering useful caution. We went through the sequence frame by frame. The taps, the power cut, the handle click, the flare throw, the shot decision, the drive out. Naming each step took some poison out of it. I still wake at small hours when wind drags branches across siding. I still check locks once before bed, sometimes twice if rain comes hard. I no longer check them 10 times. I kept every document. The notebook maps are in a firebox. Digital copies of photos, calls, and reports live on 2 drives in separate locations. The blurred camera frame, the static glitch clip, the measurement sheets, the lab letter, the compromise chain notice. All of it is logged in a private binder by date and time. I do that because precision kept me alive when fear wanted to take over, and because I will not let the record be flattened into a story about stress and shadows. People ask if it came back. No. Not to that property before sale, not to our new place, not on my work routes. The perimeter pacing ended after the wounding shot and never resumed. That is the definitive part. The unresolved part is what it was and how many files like mine got filed under language safe enough to ignore. If you expected me to end by saying I understand it now, I do not. I understand only the boundaries of what I witnessed. It was real. It was territorial, methodical, and willing to test structure before committing force. It watched us with intent. It breached, it got hit, and it withdrew. Dana and I survived because we had a fallback plan, usable light, a vehicle ready, and just enough discipline to act in sequence while terrified. I am safe now, housed, employed, still married, still ordinary in most ways that matter. I buy groceries, change oil, argue about thermostat settings, and walk my dog in daylight like a normal man. I also live with the knowledge that one October, on 5 acres at the edge of cedar and poplar, something paced our perimeter every night, learned our weak points, and forced me to admit the woods hold at least one category I cannot file. That is the plain account. I have nothing to gain by dressing it up, and nothing left to prove by pretending it did not happen.